Greetings from Guidestone. I'm O.S. Hawkins, and as you can see, I have a coronavirus beard that's working out here. I promise you, as soon as we get back in the office, it's going to be gone. But I want to personally welcome all of you who are joining us for this webcast. Our folks are going to be discussing the CARES Act and its impact on our churches, associations, institutions, wherever we may be. Our team wants to walk you through the benefit and staffing matters and all that's related to it. After the webcast, I hope you'll go to guidestone.org/coronavirus, and there you'll find the many links we have to Q&As and other things that are there. So thank you for the privilege of being with you today as we seek to flesh out our vision statement. It says we exist to honor the Lord by being a lifelong partner with our participants in enhancing their financial security. And now it's my honor to introduce to you Seth Hawkins. He's no relation to me, though I wish he were. I claim him as my own. Seth's one of the great young leaders in Guidestone of the next generation. And he's going to introduce to you our webcast, our sessions, our speakers. God bless you as you serve wherever you're serving in the ministry that God you have received from the Lord. So we love you. We thank God for partnership with you. And let's get on with this webcast.
Thank you, Dr. Hawkins. I appreciate the introduction, and welcome everyone to Guidestone's webcast on navigating the COVID-19 crisis. We have a lot to cover today that's very timely, and we hope you will find it very useful and valuable as you navigate this season. Here at Guidestone, we take our responsibility that we have to partner with organizations such as yours very seriously. We're thankful to have the opportunity to walk this with you, to let you know what to expect coming forward and what you can do about it, what your options might be. I do want to cover a few things before we get started. We will have a Q&A session the last 30 minutes of this webcast. So as you have questions, whether now or throughout the presentation, submit those in the question area of the control panel so we can get to those. I'll be farming those out to our subject matter experts during that time. For those of you that submit questions that we can't get to because of time constraints, send those to info@guidestone.org for us to follow up with you. If for some reason you do get cut off or can't finish the webcast, we will be sending out an email with the webcast recording 48 hours after it's done. We'll also be posting it out on our website, guidestone.org/calendar, for you to revisit at a later date or perhaps point someone to it that needs to hear this information. Without any further delay, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Her name is Jennifer Trousdale. She is Associate Counsel here at Guidestone over Corporate and Fiduciary Services. She'll be talking to us a little bit about the CARES Act and the Family First Relief for employers. Jen, I'll toss it over to you.
Seth, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm pleased to be here to walk us through what the different legislative and regulatory relief has been provided to our churches and our ministries. So thank you for letting me walk through that. There have been several different stimulus packages released over the last month that can offer quite a bit of advantages for our churches trying to navigate this time with lower charitable contributions and really wondering what the next step is going to be. And then secondly, I hope to spend part of this day covering President Trump's new guidelines for how to reopen our economy and our large venues and our churches to gathering again. And every church is going to have to decide these things for themselves, but hopefully through our presentation today, you will be able to understand what's available to you, what information you need to be able to make the next best decision for your congregation. So with that said, let's first give a high-level overview of this legislative and regulatory relief. We're first going to talk about small business administration loans. Then we're going to move to payroll tax relief that almost every employer can take advantage of. And finally, I want to make sure we cover the paid leave credits that employers who choose to provide that leave are also able to take advantage of. And again, as I mentioned, we are going to address those guidelines that President Trump came out with at the end of last week. And in doing that, we're specifically going to talk about the impact on churches and when doors can open and how we can take care of our congregations in that time. We're going to talk through the criteria for actually moving through different phases of a multi-phase approach that President Trump and his administration believe are going to best set up our congregations in our workplaces to be safe and yet engaged with each other. So let's move on. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of tax relief, I do want to make sure I spend a few minutes covering the SBA programs for small businesses, including churches and ministries. Unfortunately, we learned last week that these programs have exhausted their funding, and we are currently waiting on Congress to circle back and fund these programs with additional funds. So it's possible that your church or ministry has already applied for these loans and received these loans. And to that extent, I want to talk to you about how you can use those loan proceeds. And to the extent you haven't already applied for these loans, I do want to address it so that you know what is available to you should those funds come through. With that said, here is a helpful chart for you to reference about the different programs that the SBA provides churches and ministries, in addition to other small employers. And very briefly, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program has been around for a long time, but the SBA has clarified that churches do have access to these loans as well. Now, the terms may not seem as favorable as the Paycheck Protection Program loans, but I do want to make sure you realize that these are available to you. And if your specific circumstance warrants this type of loan, make sure you speak to the SBA about its availability. Again, currently the SBA has ceased accepting applications for these types of loans due to funding restrictions, but keep an eye out on the news in case the SBA opens up the application process again. Turning to the Paycheck Protection Program loans, that specifically was created by Congress through the CARES Act so that employers could have access to these loan proceeds and keep people employed. And basically, what employers can do is apply for a loan up to 2.5 times the average monthly payroll costs of their organization. And it's possible that the entire amount of the loan can be forgiven, which is just unique and I'm sure wonderfully good news for loan recipients. And with that said, there are specific types of uses for these loan proceeds in order for those loans to be forgiven by the lender. Specifically, those loans must be used on payroll expenses, which includes the wages paid to employees. It also includes retirement contributions and employer contributions toward medical coverage for those employees. So know that that is available. You could also use those loan proceeds to pay down mortgage interest or rent and toward utilities. So many employers are finding this useful, and which is why the program has been depleted so far. So keep your eye open on whether or not this is a possibility for you in the future. With that said, a church or ministry can apply for both loans should they be available. And know that a church does not have to have a determination from the IRS in order to qualify as a 501c3. So go ahead and make that application if that's right for your church. And finally, you can apply for loans from both programs, but those loan proceeds cannot be used for the exact same types of expenses. So just keep that in mind. And if you need to, work with an advisor to help you navigate all of those issues. In addition to the relief measures that we've already covered, Congress very specifically wanted to make sure that employers had access to an employment tax deferral as soon as possible. And what that means is that during the time between March 27th, 2020, throughout the rest of this year, Congress and the IRS have said that employers may defer deposits and payments of employment taxes. And specifically, those taxes are the 6.2% of employees' wages that go towards Social Security taxes. And this is a remedy that employers can immediately take advantage of. And just last week, the IRS released guidance about how logistically employers can do this. And they can do that through filing their Form 941, and it's going to be modified to specifically have employers request that deferral be made. So keep an eye out for that. Again, every single employer can take advantage of that. Now, I do want to make a note that if you as a church or ministry has applied for and received a Paycheck Protection Program loan, as long as that loan has not yet been forgiven by the SBA approved lender, you can still defer those payroll taxes. Now, if your loan has been forgiven, and once it has been forgiven, you may no longer defer those tax payments. So keep that in mind if you are trying to take advantage of the most relief possible, that some of these provisions do play off of each other and are contingent upon each other. Now, another type of tax relief afforded under the CARES Act for employers is called the Employee Retention Credit. Now, this credit is available to employers who do not have a Paycheck Protection Program loan. In fact, they cannot have both of those at the same time. So for these employers who want to take advantage of this credit, it's available to employers who have been negatively affected by COVID-19. And what this means is that financially, you are not receiving the same amount of revenue, or your operations have shut down due to the virus and the pandemic. And virtually this affects almost every single employer to the extent they have not had that Paycheck Protection Program loan as well. So if that's the case for you, consider looking into this for your organization. And specifically, the amount of this credit is going to be 50% of the wages paid toward employees for one of these qualifying employers, up to $10,000 per year. So 50% of $10,000, it's going to be $5,000 per employee of this employer over the course of this year. With that said, here are a few things to keep in mind with respect to this credit. The credit is against the employer's applicable employment taxes for each quarter. But to the extent that there is an excess, that can be refunded to the employer during that time. Know that qualified wages do not include paid leave payments. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. If you are providing paid leave under the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, that's going to be taken care of differently, and you're going to have different credits that apply to you under those wages. Also, qualified wages do not include wages earned by ministers in the exercise of their ministry. Unfortunately, with the way that the tax code defines compensation, ministers' wages in the exercise of their ministry are just not included for this type of tax credit. But the tax credits are available for the wages paid to your non-clergy staff members. So keep that in mind. And then finally, qualified wages also include the amounts that you pay toward qualified health expenses on behalf of your employees. So know that this is really confusing. It could take a lot of coordination with your tax advisor to make sure you are applying for the right amount of credit under the Employee Retention Credit. But know that even if you don't have that figured out yet, you as an employer still can take advantage of that tax deferral that I spoke about previously. So you do not have to wait to figure out your credits in order to defer tax payments. And I do want to make sure that you guys realize that self-employed individuals or ministers who are self-employed, they can also take advantage of this tax relief. It's just, again, going to be for the employer portion of Social Security taxes. So to the extent that that self-employed minister is having to pay the employee share of the Social Security taxes, that will not be deferred, and that will still have to be paid by the minister. But know that relief is still out there and still available, so please connect with your tax advisor for that. So moving on, there is still one more way that Congress has provided tax relief for employers, and that is through the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act. That act, as we spoke about earlier, provides that employers need to give their employees paid leave when they previously haven't been compelled to provide that paid leave. So paid leave would be provided in the form of sick leave if the employee himself or herself is sick or is caring for a family member who is sick. But also that act provides that an employee can take advantage of paid leave should their child's daycare or school be closed due to COVID-19. With that said, this is a brand new requirement for employers that they've never had to navigate before. And Congress knew that that would be an imposition, especially because this requirement is only for employers with 500 or fewer employees. and they were not expecting this expense of paid leave during this time. So what Congress wanted to do was to make sure that employers had these expenses covered. So to the extent that employers are paying these paid leave wages, Congress is providing a credit, a dollar for dollar credit for those wages paid. Now, my colleague Scott Charbonneau later today will talk through other aspects of the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act and those paid leave requirements, and specifically how they affect employers. But what I want to focus on right now are those tax credits that those employers can take advantage of. So no, again, it's going to be a dollar for dollar credit for the employers that provide these paid leave wages. And that is in order to prevent these employers from being in a negative financial impact as a result of complying with the law. So in order to take advantage of that, practically an employer is able to retain any amount of federal employment taxes equal to the amount of qualified leave wages paid. So what you're paying under the statute, whether that's 100% of the employee's salary for certain circumstances or 2/3 of the employee's salary in other circumstances, every dollar you paid, you'll be able to claim as a credit on your payroll taxes. So if the taxes yet to be deposited by your organization are not sufficient to cover the cost of leave, then know that you can immediately apply to the IRS for an advanced payment for those paid leave wages. And the way to do that is going to be through a specific form to the IRS called a Form 7200. So keep that in mind. You can find it on their website if that is what you need to do to be able to get those paid leave wages paid immediately. So if you do have an employee who is requesting paid leave and you intend to apply for a credit against your payroll employment taxes on that paid leave, what you need to do is to keep all documentation related to that paid leave request. So each employee needs to have their separate documentation for their request. Additionally, you need to keep your Form 941. Remember, that's your quarterly federal tax return. Keep that for documentation purposes, as well as any Form 7200 that you use to apply for an advanced credit, an advanced payment from the IRS. And also keep any other applicable filings related to your employee's leave request during that time. Know that you may, if you have a generous PTO policy, you can supplement the paid leave with PTO so that your employee is receiving a full compensation of leave. With that said, the credit from the IRS is not going to be for any amount over the statutorily required amount in the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act. So just keep that in mind, that wages paid to an employee may be more than you're able to get in a credit if you happen to be more generous. And then finally, you can receive these credits with a Paycheck Protection Program loan. But paid leave credits are not eligible as payroll costs under the Paycheck Protection Program. So again, you're going to get benefits under two different programs and they cannot be used together. Hopefully that was a helpful overview of the types of relief that legislatively and regulatorily are available for your churches and ministries. Again, we here at Guidestone are always available to help you walk through what those options could be for you, and please reach out to us with any questions. I now want to turn to the recent guidance that President Trump came out with regarding when to reopen our economy. We here at Guidestone are joining with you in our prayers and our concerns about our congregations. And we know that you are asking, when can we finally reopen our church doors and start worshiping together again? Hopefully by walking through this guidance, it's the guidelines for opening up America again. Hopefully by walking through these guidelines, we will be able to help you understand what to look forward to with your congregations. Now, keep in mind that any actual decision affecting your churches are going to be made at the local level. It's going to be made by your governor or by your mayor or county commissioner. So keep in mind that you still need to monitor those local laws and orders affecting your church. With that said, no matter what part of the phase and process that we are in trying to reopen our economy and getting together again as congregations, we will continue to have to employ protective measures. Individuals will still need to take advantage of those protective hygiene measures and will also need to take care to not expose themselves, especially if they're more vulnerable in our population. Also, employers will still need to monitor their workforce for employee sicknesses and to make sure they have policies in place that accurately respond to employees who are sick or who are caring for sick relatives. With that said, let's move through this multi-phase approach so that you can have a better understanding of what to anticipate and how to make a decision for your congregation. But again, be aware of what's in your local jurisdiction. And know that even if your local state or area has decided to reopen parts of your economy and you may be able or permitted to meet as a congregation, you know your congregation best. So if you have vulnerable members of your congregation who would be susceptible to illness if you should meet, you may want to reconsider that may not be best at that time. But here are some guidelines to help you make the best decision for you. In President Trump's guidelines, he is anticipating that the economy will reopen in different sectors, meaning different metropolitan areas or states or even regions of the country, based on how trending of the illness is taking place. So he anticipates 3 different phases, and we're going to walk through how the administration anticipates moving through those phases. So before even moving into phase 1 of reopening our economy in our different areas, the administration guidelines indicate that these regions or areas or metropolitan areas will need to be able to satisfy certain gating criteria. And what that means is that this specific state or area needs to demonstrate the following. First of all, there needs to be a downward trend of COVID-19 related symptoms over a period of 14 days. Secondly, there needs to be a downward trend of confirmed cases of COVID-19 over that 14-day period. And then thirdly, hospitals in that area need to be treating patients without being in crisis care, meaning that operations need to be returned back to normal. And once all 3 of those gating criteria have been met, then local regulators can then consider moving that area into phase 1 of our economy reopening. Now, at the bottom of this slide, I have listed some additional criteria that the presidential administration is going to want to see from states in order for that progress to be made. So you want to make sure that you take a look at that so that you know what to anticipate in your area. So phase 1 of the administration's guidelines, we've learned, indicate that large venues such as churches will be able to reopen during this time as long as the church operations are subject to strict social distancing protocols. So what that means is that individuals are still strongly encouraged to not attend any gatherings of more than 10 people. So even though churches are able to reopen during that time, it's really up to your judgment on whether or not you can continue to meet with those strict social distancing protocols in place. But do know that these guidelines specifically mention houses of worship. So the Trump administration was considering churches while these guidelines were developed. With that said, know that your vulnerable congregants will still need to shelter in place in this time. Church or any other small group gatherings will still not be appropriate for those folks. And to the extent that your church can, as an employer, you should encourage your employees to continue to telework as much as possible. And also, I know we're entering the season where many of your churches are sponsoring Vacation Bible School or day camps for kids in your ministry. And unfortunately, if you are in an area that is still in phase 1 or even trying to meet the gating criteria before phase 1, those VBS camps will have to be closed during that time. So if after moving to phase 1 and experiencing another 14 days of meeting the gating criteria, your local government may consider declaring your area ready for phase 2. And what phase 2 allows for large venues such as churches is by reopening to the extent that operations are with moderate social distancing protocols. And moderate social distancing protocols means that any gatherings of more than 50 people are, are to be avoided if at all possible. Additionally, any common area in your churches where folks can't help but be close together, those areas must be closed. So know that in phase 2, there is a little bit more flexibility for churches, but still moderate social distancing protocols in place. With that said, your vulnerable congregants should be sheltering at home in place during this time because it is just too risky still for their health to be subjected to large gatherings. As an employer, churches still consider your employees to telework as much as possible. But know this, as long as those social distancing protocols are followed, those moderate protocols, your camps and your VBS can reopen. So keep that in mind that there is more flexibility in this time period if that's the right thing for your congregation. And then finally, if your state or region has satisfied that gating criteria for a third time for an additional 14 days, your local government may declare that your area is ready to move into phase 3 of reopening the economy. And what we anticipate under phase 3 is that churches will be able to open with limited social distancing guidelines in place. Now, that doesn't mean that church is going to feel like normal. In fact, there are still some parts of your worship service that may be different. It may be different in how you take the Lord's Supper. It may be different in how you greet your fellow worshipers on Sunday mornings. But it's, again, closer to normal. And so hopefully that would be pretty welcomed in your churches. But that said, vulnerable individuals still need to take precautions as much as possible. The government does anticipate that these individuals will be able to participate in worship services, but to the extent that their health is compromised, they do need to practice probably more social distancing than the regular congregant. Employers can resume normal business operations in an unrestricted way, but they still may want to consider limiting work travel in the immediate future. And then finally, pastoral care activities can resume because hospitals and nursing homes will be able to allow visitors when in the prior 2 phases, they haven't been able to do that. So this will be welcome relief when we finally can get back to normal. But also know, again, that this is going to be a jurisdiction by jurisdiction decision, and it's possible that your jurisdiction may be more flexible with allowing contact with other people when a jurisdiction in different parts of the country will not be as flexible. So it's going to be interesting for a while as we all experience life pretty differently. So I hope that that has been helpful to navigate what this means for your church in this time period. Again, at Guidestone, we join you in prayers of these concerns, and we are here to help you navigate what relief may be available for you from the government during this time period, and also resources for how to keep your congregation safe, how to keep your employees provided for, and how to continue your ministry during this unprecedented time of hurt and confusion. But we are here. We're here to help you walk through that. I do want to point you to our website so that you can have access to our up-to-date information that we are providing sometimes on an hourly basis here at Guidestone. So please go to our website, take advantage of the free resources we point to you that we've developed here at Guidestone or that our other Southern Baptist agencies have created for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that insight and the expertise that you bring to the table in helping us unpack these details around the legislation that's often confusing and obviously very lengthy, and how we can put that into best practice. Next, I'd like to introduce to you Sean DeRoe. Sean is one of our relationship managers here at Guidestone. He's going to be talking to us a little bit about the benefits, considerations of benefits related to health and retirement. Sean, take it away.
Thanks, Seth, and thank you for joining us today. You know, I've had the privilege of serving our Southern Baptist churches for over 18 years all around the United States, and I can't think of a more critical time than right now that we get the opportunity to come along and support your ministry. So pastors and church leaders, I'm talking directly to you because I understand you've likely allocated anywhere between 45 to 60% of your annual budget towards salaries and benefits. And with this coronavirus crisis, it's created a lot of difficult decisions. And while I'm sure this crisis has increased your faith, it's probably also left you with a lot of unanswered questions. But Guidestone is here to help. Our goal is to provide information, insights, as well as considerations to help support you through the various regulatory changes. So let's first start with the coronavirus related distribution, or CRD. This distribution allows participants to withdraw up to $100,000 if they have that amount in their retirement account without occurring any type of early penalty or mandatory withholdings. So let me double click on, first of all, the qualified participants, because that's what makes you eligible to take advantage of this provision. You just can't call up and ask Guidestone to start making distributions because you want them. No, you would have to have been affected by the COVID-19 by either testing positive or a spouse or a dependent, or having some financial hardship from the quarantine or termination, layoffs, or anything that created, again, an internal financial hardship. So you can, as mentioned, pull out as much as $100,000. And outside of this particular provision, if you're under the age of 59, typically there's a 10% penalty to pull your money out. But that 10% penalty has been waived and you will not incur that. In addition, there's typically a 20% mandatory withholding that you don't have to withhold if you indeed you needed all of the money. Now, the good thing is that you can indeed still recontribute this money back into your retirement plan over a 3-year period and not incur any type of taxes. Or if you do take it as a distribution, then you can spread the taxes out over a 3-year period and not incur any heavy tax in 1 year. So the corona-related distribution, again, is something that is out there now. We pray that no one has had to take advantage of it from a testing or a financial hardship, but just know that is available. So now let's talk about the enhanced loans and options, because those two have changed. Anyone who is self-certified will be eligible now to borrow up to the lesser of $100,000 or 95% of their vested account balance. And that will go into effect around May 15th. So what does that mean? That means that you have the opportunity to borrow up to, again, lesser of $100,000 or 95% of your account vested balance. Why 95%? Because we want to ensure in this volatile market that if you do call us for a loan and in between the process of the paperwork that the market could go up or go down. So we want to ensure that we get the majority of those monies that you're asking for, the 95%, to you in a loan value. And then indeed, if you needed the rest of it, be it if that 5% increased or if it decreased due to the market volatility, you can now take that through the CRD option as well. Now, the good thing is that with this loan, you have the opportunity to delay the repayment up to 1 year, as well as if you have an existing loan, that option is still applicable as well. And of course, to help and those who have been adversely affected by the COVID-19 crisis, we are waiving all origination fees, and we don't charge fees for any withdrawals in terms of hardship for the CRD option. So just know that those two options, be it loans or the distribution, is available for those who self-certify and have the eligibility to pull it out. So let's talk about the required minimum distribution changes, or RMD. Those changes will be waived for 2020 for those who typically have to take an RMD. But if you are currently drawing a systematic payment and you would like to continue that, then you're okay. If you like to have those stop, just give us a call at our customer relations department. Or if you haven't received your RMD this year and you would like to receive it for 2020, then feel free to reach out to us and we'll get those to you as well. So you may be asking, as a plan participant, what is my role in this? And I would tell you it's absolutely nothing. There's no action required on your part to offer these provisions. However, while we do recognize the needs that your staff may have at this time, we also know how hard they've worked over the years to save for their future. Therefore, we always encourage them, as well as you as the plan sponsor, to consider all options. So let's talk about some of these other options, in particular in terms of the financial relief opportunities. With the new $2.4 trillion stimulus package that was passed in late March, you, your staff, or even your church may benefit from some stimulus that you qualify for. For example, if you are single and your adjusted gross income is less than $75,000, then you will receive a $1,200 stimulus check. If you're married and you have a $150,000 adjusted gross income and you file jointly, then that amount goes up to $2,400. And then if you have dependents that are under the age of 17, you will get an additional $500 per dependent. So I've been asked a lot, and I've also know that there's been checks has already been received, but I get calls a lot, and maybe a pastor would say, look, I've opted out of Social Security. Do I receive those stimulus checks? And the answer is yes. And I've had others that say, well, I'm retired and I'm currently drawing Social Security and I'm working part-time. Do I get those stimulus rebates? And the answer is yes. I've heard those who've asked, look, I haven't even filed my 2019 tax returns. Am I eligible? And the answer is yes. I recently talked to a pastor and his wife, and they have 3 children between the age of 18 and 23. And they're still dependent and they're in college, and they asked, do we get the additional $500 for their dependents? And I said, unfortunately, the answer is no. So, but I felt their pain. And I always encourage everybody as they call and talk to us to make sure that you refer to a tax advisor to ensure that you are meeting all the qualifications to get these stimulus rebates, but know that's an option out there. So now let's talk about the enhanced unemployment benefits, because this is something that's unique and new to ministries. Matter of fact, in the past, most ministries are not eligible for unemployment benefits because they don't pay unemployment insurance. However, with the Stimulus Care Act, it does allow you now to participate in the event that you've had to lay off staff or furlough them. So if indeed, unfortunately, you had to lay off a staff member, encourage them to apply to their local state unemployment benefits, because they are eligible to receive those through the end of 2020. And in addition, on top of it, they'll also get a stimulus of $600 that's included as part of those unemployment benefits that will go through the end of July. I recently talked to a church who unfortunately had to lay off all of their daycare and school workers. And they were asking for some information, and I mentioned the unemployment benefits, and they had no idea that their teachers would be eligible for these unemployment benefits. So I was encouraged, even though we never want to see anybody have to take this type of furlough or termination due to this unprecedented event, that we were allowed to provide information to still help those school workers with the unemployment benefits in terms of the information. So I encourage you again to check with your local state unemployment benefit department and then make sure that indeed, if that is the route that you have to go, be it you or your staff, that you're taking advantage and fully getting everything that you're eligible to receive. So now that we've looked at the qualified retirement plan provisions, as well as a financial relief option for families and those who may experience unemployment, let's now focus on a few financial relief options specifically designed for the church. Now, likely you just listened to Jennifer Trosdale talk about these 2 SBA loans, but I still think it's important to pull out a few reminders that may benefit you. Now, of course, you've probably heard that on April 16th, the SBA stopped accepting applications due to a lack of funding. But just in case you have received these, I want to remind you that the Paycheck Protection Program loan is intended to provide up to 8 weeks of cash flow assistance through 100% federally guaranteed loans. In other words, you are able to use these monies for your payroll cost, group health insurance, paid sick leave, medical, as well as retirement premiums. As well, you can use this for mortgage interest payments, utilities, and a few other things. So again, if you are fortunate enough to have received this paycheck protection loan, prayerfully, you have put it to work to help sustain you through this crisis. In addition to the Paycheck Protection Program loan, there's also the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. This too is a SBA loan that requires that you use the proceeds to help you with your fixed expenses, as well as your payroll and other operating expenses as well. So hopefully, if you did apply and you were fortunate enough to receive these funds, you are appropriately applying it to help you again sustain through this difficult financial times. But now that we've discussed a few options that hopefully will help alleviate some of the financial pressures during this crisis, we still understand there may be needs to consider additional budget cuts as well as cost reductions. So let's take a look at your employer benefits and consider a couple of short-term plan adjustments that could also benefit your ministry's budget. Now, let me just add, regardless if it's one of our experienced insurance relationship managers or our retirement relationship managers, our, our goal is to provide a consultative approach to best serve you as well. So we are committed to providing a cost-efficient and comprehensive benefit structure and help you get through this time. So let's start by first looking at the medical short-term adjustments. We've already done a few things for our staffs that could potentially start benefiting you as soon as today. Matter of fact, beginning April 1st, if you do utilize Guidestone for your medical coverage, you now have the opportunity to step down to a lower cost healthcare plan of your choice for the entire remainder of 2020. So let me just give you an example. You could move into a plan with a higher deductible in exchange for a lower monthly cost. Or you can look at another option, maybe move from a PPO plan into one of our protection plans like our Value Health, or even our lowest cost option, which is the Secured Health Plan. Regardless of which option or which direction you choose, just know that we are willing and able to be flexible with you to help you save costs while still supporting and protecting your staff with their medical needs. In addition, our plans have also adjusted to further support those affected by the coronavirus by eliminating some of the member costs for services like those who may have tested for the COVID-19. The approved diagnostic test is no longer a cost. How about inpatient in-network treatment? Those costs have been waived as well as access to Teledoc. Of course, now, if you have any particular questions or concerns, you can always reach out to our relationship managers or our customer service team, or you can also go online and pull up your employer access program and pull out the indicative information like your premiums, as well as those who are part of the health care benefits to get more information. But either way, we're here to support you. Now, as you know, a healthy retirement plan helps prepare employees for a very successful retirement. And your role as the plan sponsor is critical in motivating employees to properly position themselves. So when they're no longer able to work, they have enough saved to make that transition. So while it may be necessary to consider making changes to what your church provides in form of employer contributions, I think it's how the church decides to do it is equally as important. For example, we have received some feedback from our churches in this critical time that they may need to consider pausing or stopping their employer contributions. And while I understand that may be a need, we always like to come alongside them and have a consultative approach to help them look at the different options to determine if indeed that is the best thing to do, as well as the most cost savings. For example, there are churches who have already decided to turn their non-match considerations into matching. So this not only lowers the church's contributions, as well as may save on the budget, but it also incentivizes their employees to start increasing their own contribution dollars, because we all know, even in a down low market, it's critical and important to continue putting money in particular at these times. As well as another option is you can look at is maybe the matching plan. There's some consideration from a lot of our churches who are looking at matching that may want to consider moving from a dollar to dollar match to maybe a 2-for-1 match. So if you're a church that probably provides a 3% matching, for example, and that particular employee gets the full match. If they go up to 3%, maybe make it 2-for-1. In other words, they have to do the 6% to get the 3%, or whatever percentage that you decide on. That again forces the employee to potentially increase their contributions, and it could create some cost savings on your end. But the bottom line is, regardless of which way you go, even if you have to reduce your matching without total elimination, you want to maintain your retirement, not just for cost savings, which is obviously critical at this time, but also for your employees to continuously motivate them, incentivize them, and help them prepare for their retirement account. So bottom line, look, we know this isn't an easy decision, and you're likely considering a multitude of budget reductions to sustain you through this difficult time. Therefore, if you are considering making changes, we encourage you to first contact us and let's have a consultative conversation to help review all of your options so you can not only meet your budget reductions, but also continue to support your staff with preparing for their retirement. So in conclusion, I just want to remind you once again that we're here for you. We're here to serve. You know, in my 18 years here on staff, one thing that I know is the SBC is a family. And in times of needs like this, families are there to help. And we want to be your trusted consultant. We want to be your strategic partner. We want to be a point of contact. So if there's anything that we can do, regardless if it's on the employer side, be it consultative feedback with your retirement plan or your medical plans, call us. If there's anything that's dealing with your employee retirement account, because we understand the market volatility has a lot of people reviewing and asking questions on their own diversification. We recommend that you call us. The bottom line is we want to be your support. Matter of fact, our president, Dr. O.S. Hawkins, constantly reminds us that we are an extension to your ministry. And he tells us, as the Bible says, that we are serving those who serve the Lord with the integrity of our hearts and the skillfulness of our hands. We look forward to continuously serving you, not just through this crisis, but far beyond it. So whatever we can do, we're here for you. God bless.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate that insight on your end. Certainly a lot to digest there and a lot to consider as we move forward. Next, I want to bring Scott Charbonneau in front of you. He is our Managing Director of Insurance Plans here at Guidestone. And the topic he's going to be speaking on is one we've received a lot of calls and emails on over the last few weeks and months related to what options are available as it stands for these decisions that need to be made by employers that will affect their staff. So he's going to be talking about 5 different options that employers have to consider when deciding what to do during this season. So Scott, why don't you speak to us about staffing considerations? Please share with us.
Well, appreciate it, Seth. Thank you very much for sending it over to me. I wanted just to start off by saying thank you to all of those that are in attendance here. It's great to have you involved in this experience, this event that we're hosting. I do think it's an important time for us to come together as those who are followers of the Lord and support one another. I know many of us have been thrust into a situation that is out of the norm. It's uncomfortable. Many of you have transitioned online and you've had to figure out different ways to engage your leaders at church. You've also had to do different things to try to support your team. So I know this has been very unique and different. And that was no more on display as we celebrated Easter. And that was a different experience than any of us have ever had before. But I also find it encouraging that through it all, we can still have hope in our risen Lord. So I just appreciate all that you are doing out there as a church leader and really want to encourage you in doing that. And really the point of this conversation that we're about to have is really to help support you as we're acclimating to this new situation. I wanted to share with you some information. We've had hundreds of calls over the last few weeks, and in many cases, the same questions keep coming up, and that's really been the start of what this presentation is all about. It really trying to help you balance your budget and make sure that you're protecting your team in this time of crisis. So that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. As has already been discussed, there's assistance available through the government and through benefit adjustments that could help you in this crisis. We also know that many churches and ministries, for many of you, around half of your budgets are devoted to employees. That means that making staffing adjustments could become necessary. So in this session, I'll quickly review some of the staffing scenarios that we've received questions about and give you some basic facts to consider in making decisions. The purpose of this presentation is to give you general information. It's not legal or tax advice about your unique situation, but please seek out qualified legal counsel in your area for specific recommendations. The content in this presentation is based on Guidestone's understanding of federal and state laws, regulations, and guidance. They are subject to change as additional laws, regulations, and guidance are enacted or released. Your situation may be affected by other laws also not referenced here. I think it's also important to note that you all might be in different situations. You may need to make immediate changes. You may be able to delay. In either case, we want you to know that Guidestone is here to support you. As you're making these decisions, please feel free to reach out to our team, and we will help you come up with the benefit strategies that support your ministry. We will also be joining with you in prayer, asking for wisdom and discernment in these trying times. The first scenario we will discuss is for you if you're going to maintain the status quo. In this scenario, all of your employees, exempt or non-exempt, continue to receive the same compensation and benefits. The CARES Act may provide you with relief, such as payroll tax credits, tax deferrals, and loans. Additionally, if you receive a Small Business Administration Payroll Protection Program loan and you don't terminate employees, you may be eligible to have the entire loan forgiven. Under the Family Medical Leave Act, your active employees may still take unpaid job-protected leave for specified family and medical reasons while maintaining group health coverage under the same terms and conditions as they could prior to the coronavirus pandemic. Additionally, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act created 2 requirements for you as an employer with fewer than 500 employees. First, you would have to offer 2 weeks of paid sick leave. And secondly, you must also offer 10 weeks of paid childcare leave, specifically for those individuals whose childcare has been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. For more information on eligibility and pay requirements, visit the Department of Labor website, dol.gov. Now, for some of you, you may not be able to maintain the status quo. So another option could be that you would lower salary and benefits for your employees. While this is not an ideal situation, it may be necessary, but you should keep a couple of things in mind. First, a reduction in medical benefits is generally considered a material change in coverage. Your employees must be notified about the change 60 days in advance. If you're with Guidestone, our insurance program, we have made a one-time step-down option available to you to help you reduce monthly premiums. For further information about this option, please contact your relationship manager or the customer service team. For churches and ministries with other insurance coverage, contact your broker or carrier for options. Secondly, there may be applicable state employment laws that could affect you in making potential changes. We suggest that you check with a knowledgeable legal counsel in your area to fully understand any requirements that may apply to you. Next, you may be considering reducing hours for non-exempt or hourly employees. It's important to note that this could have a bearing on eligibility for some benefits, including medical coverage, disability, and life insurance. It may also impact the employee's eligibility to participate in medical continuation or COBRA. If you utilize Guidestone for your health insurance, medical continuation information can be found in the administration manual. As always, you can call your relationship manager or our customer service team for additional help. If you're with a different carrier, please contact your administrator for more information. Keep in mind that reducing hours may also change the value of other benefits that are calculated based on salary, such as term life insurance. With the passage of the CARES Act, state employment benefits may be proportionally available for your employees with reduced hours. Additional resources on this topic could be found on our website, guidestone.org. Unfortunately, some of you may have to consider doing a leave of absence or furlough program. In this approach, your employees may be able to remain employees of your church despite the fact that they're not working. This approach could create benefits and compensation changes as well. We encourage you to contact your church's benefit administrator to ask how benefits will be impacted for those on leave of absence. If you're with Guidestone, your employees on leave of absence or furlough may qualify for your Guidestone's medical and dental continuation. They may also be able to continue their life and disability coverage for up to 12 months, so long as their premiums continue to be paid. Another consideration is that furloughed employees are not eligible for the new expanded FMLA coverage as outlined by the DOL. Finally, you may be wrestling with the difficult decision to terminate or lay off employees. We know that's a hard thing to consider, especially with those that you have been doing ministry with. So we also want you to keep in mind a few points when you're making this decision. First, continuation of medical and dental benefits for Guidestone plans or COBRA for ERISA plans may be available. Additionally, terminated employees may be eligible for extended state unemployment benefits as outlined by the DOL. Finally, keep in mind that if you receive a payroll protection program loan and subsequently reduce your workforce by more than 25%, you may not be eligible to have that loan forgiven. For additional details and options, we suggest that you reach out to your area legal counsel. You can also get additional information from guidestone.org. Our privilege here at Guidestone is to serve those who serve the Lord. That's our heart, that's our calling. We suggest that you continue to reach out to us. Call us, let us know if there's anything that we can help you with. Our goal right now is to help you and your ministry stay healthy. And so that's what we're working towards. God bless you.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the insight there. Without a doubt, employers are faced with some difficult decisions ahead of them as it relates to their staff. And thank you for sharing with us those options that they have and providing some details on them. If you in the audience have any follow-up questions or need more insight on those options, please call us here at Guidestone. We'd love to be able to walk you through those, make sure you have all the detail you needed so you can make the best decision for you, your employees, and your ministry. Next, I'd like to introduce Jim Welch. He's going to be speaking to us about managing ministry risk. Jim is the managing director of our property and casualty area here at Guidestone. Jim?
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be with you today. As the entity with the ministry assignment of risk management for Southern Baptists, it's very fitting that at such a time as this, the Guidestone has a team specifically focused on risk management. There are several risk management considerations that I want to address in this session as ministries have experienced many changes in recent days. The first risk consideration is related to the increase in computer use and online activity. I am so amazed that the Lord has prepared His church in this time to be able to reach our congregations with online church, using multiple video platforms, virtual face-to-face Sunday school and small group meetings, and the ability for online giving. All these great opportunities, however, do bring cyber risks that we want to make you aware of. Here are some best practices to consider in this new environment. Number one, as you've undoubtedly heard, cyber attacks are at an all-time high because of people working from home. So make sure that you have strong passwords in place and use multi-factor authentication when possible. And remind your staff to be cautious in clicking on links in emails from unknown sources. Secondly, update software and antivirus protection to safeguard your computer data because it may contain sensitive information like donor giving history and employee records. Also, encourage all your work from employees to have a password for their Wi-Fi and to avoid connecting to public or open networks. As we move to more online giving and money transfers to continue operations, cyber criminals are using this as an opportunity for financial gain. One of the most prevalent scams begins with a hacking of a senior leader's email account, followed by an email sent from that account to the financial secretary or administrator asking for banking information to be changed before a money transfer or a payroll payment. Always be suspicious of this and have a two-step authorization for these disbursements, including a phone call to confirm that this change is intentional, especially if it's to an overseas account. And as always, be suspicious of any email asking for your login or financial information. And many churches have begun using Zoom to hold Sunday school and small group meetings, which we think is great. However, when you set up a Zoom meeting without a password and then send out the link to your members or post it on social media, you open up your meeting to Zoom bombing. These are people looking to disrupt church meetings. They jump onto your Zoom call as a participant and have been known to use foul language or even present unacceptable or lewd content. We recommend that you set passwords and controls around your Zoom meetings and carefully consider what you post on social media related to them. As a reminder, when you broadcast your services, you still need to make sure that you have proper licensing in place to avoid any copyright infringement issues. A second risk ministries need to be aware of during this time is related to property damage. Empty buildings are more at risk than frequently used buildings when it comes to water damage from leaking or broken pipes, fire damage from electrical issues that go unseen, opportunistic theft, and even vandalism. We've heard several reports of churches around the country being vandalized or being broken into or destroyed by arson. Although the liability, auto, and workers' compensation portion of your policies may have reduced risk at this time, your property is at higher risk. So make sure to consider the following. Lock up your doors, windows, and external stairwells. Prevent easy access to those who may be trying to take advantage of this pandemic. Make sure to keep up your maintenance and landscaping. Don't make it look like no one is around. And to that point, don't forget to stop by your building at least once a week, if not more, to see if any damage from a storm or another incident has occurred. If damage has occurred, reach out to your insurance company to get it taken care of immediately. The longer it sits there, the more extensive the eventual damage could be. We also want to make sure that you're not so focused on COVID-19 that we forget that for much of the country, we have just entered severe storm season with rapid spring temperature changes. In the last couple of weeks, for example, Colorado Springs hit a record low of 7 degrees while South Florida was at 100. And then there was a deadly tornado outbreak in the South. So we are encouraging all our policyholders to make sure they are doing what they can to maintain their facilities during this time of quarantine, as long as it's safe and as long as it's legal. And to also make sure that they continue to have adequate property coverage in place for storms and any other unexpected losses. The third risk consideration is protecting your ministry finances from embezzlement. Most ministries built their financial controls around having most of their income come in on a Sunday morning in the way of checks and cash. Now ministries are receiving tithes and offerings online, through the mail, or dropped off at the ministry office at various times. The change in the way people give could make it more difficult to account for the weekly giving. So depending on your e-giving platform, you should have many tools available to keep track of what is given and from whom. Make sure to add controls around these, just like you have in the past. If you don't have controls around your finances, well, now is a good time to start. Temptation is at an all-time high due to financial fears, unexpected access to cash or checks, and the opportunity to attribute loss of income to COVID-19. Some of the basic safeguards can include documenting all financial transactions clearly and immediately. This will help prevent any confusion for where the money came from, as well as provide accountability. Make sure that one person is not solely responsible for handling every aspect of your ministry's finances. Designate a financial responsible member to record the money received, then ask another to review and initial that record. These are just a few of the controls you can put in place. For additional financial protective measures, please check out our COVID-19 landing page. Lastly, Guidestone and our insurance partner, Brotherhood Mutual, have received dozens of questions about risk management, legal, and insurance ramifications of allowing church buildings to be used for COVID-19 related aid. For example, several hospitals have reached out to churches to see if they would open their buildings to be temporary hospitals, quarantine shelters, or testing sites for COVID-19. Additionally, some ministries are wanting to fill the gaps during COVID-19 by providing daycare facilities specifically for medical workers' children, food distribution centers, and many other options. Work with your local insurance agent on specific insurance questions, but also consider the following. You need to check to see if it's legal. Make sure that before you say yes to the opportunity, that you have a facility licensed and properly equipped for the task. We've seen churches open themselves up to becoming essential daycares for medical workers, only to find out they didn't meet state or local guidelines. Secondly, get a facility use agreement in place with any outside organization before giving them access to your facility. Brotherhood Mutual provides a sample facility use agreement on their website, and it spells out who is responsible for damage, it addresses legal issues that could arise, and helps determine the use parameters of the facility. Third, make sure volunteers are properly screened. If your ministry has the desire and capability to help by doing a daycare, your volunteers ideally should have already gone through recommended screening procedures, including an application, background screen, reference check, and an interview. When checking with your insurance company, make sure they are aware of the activity. Just don't assume that you're covered, but be proactive in confirming that coverage is in fact in place for these ministries. As a final recommendation related to your ministry's overall risk management approach, take this time to really get your ducks in a row. Yes, there are risks that are more prevalent now than they were before, but also consider the risk management projects that have been on the back burner. For example, you can use this time to update your policies and procedures, including your infectious disease plan. Train your staff and volunteers on child abuse prevention by watching a free online workshop like the one for Ministry Safe, or utilize resources found on Guidestones and Brotherhood Mutual's website. Update your employee handbooks to be in line with your mission so that you have clear and consistent expectations and procedures for your employees to follow. And most obviously, use this downtime to perform a deep clean and disinfection of your facility, especially in high-touch, high-traffic areas. Our greatest risk is not COVID-19, cyber attacks, storms, or embezzlement. It's actually not taking this opportunity to fulfill our calling in every way possible to love God, love others, and to share the gospel with a hopeless world. We bring these topics to you not to scare you out of doing ministry, but instead to equip you to do ministry with your eyes open to the risks so that you can minister more effectively in these days. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you today. Please know that we're praying for you.
Thank you, Jim. As always, I appreciate the insight and the expertise you bring on that subject matter. I do think it is important, as you said, to not forget the facilities at this time. For those of you in the audience that do need more information or resources on that, check out Guidestone's website or go to Brotherhood Mutual's website, one of Guidestone's partners in that area. Let's segue now to a word of encouragement, and let's talk a little bit about what recovery will look like. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Hawkins now to speak to you about that.
Thank you for being a part of this webcast today. You know, during these days of so much uncertainty that we're all going through, I've been thinking a lot about one word, and that's focus. Where our focus is. You know, Paul said, I press toward the mark for the prize, the mark, the goal, the skopos in Greek. We get our English word scope from that. What's in your crosshairs during these days? You know, Habakkuk was faced with a time that was not unlike ours. In fact, it was a lot more difficult for him because the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, were coming in to destroy Jerusalem and take the Jews into Babylonian captivity. And in that little book of his, he shows us 3 ways that people focus on difficult times. In chapter 1, we see that some focus on the problem, and it just brings confusion. If you put all your attention on this issue, which we're all dealing with now, it leads you to ask a bunch of questions that can't be answered, like Habakkuk. Lord, where are you? Why don't you answer? Well, I keep calling out to you about these things, but you don't seem to save. So focusing on the problem, that never gets us anywhere. In chapter 2, he focuses through the problem, and he finds confidence. He says, the just shall live by his faith. He looks from God's perspective. He climbs up in the watchtower. He holds to the promise. Though the vision tarries, it will surely come. He has patience, though the vision tarries. And he has that perception in the last verse of chapter 2. The Lord is in his holy temple. God has not abdicated his throne. The Most High still rules today over the affairs of men. But finally, in chapter 3, he has the best focus at all. It teaches us to focus not just on our problem and not just through our problem, but beyond our problem. He concludes chapter 3 saying, look, if everything goes to put, if the olives fail, if there's no fruit on the vine, if there are no cattle in the stalls, if everything goes to put in this economy, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet and lead me to my high places. You know, he could say those 2 I wills in verse 18, I will joy and I will rejoice, because of the 2 he wills. In verse 19, he will lead me upon my high places, and he will let me scale over obstacles with my hind feet, just like a deer does. You know, those are the ways people look at the cross. Some focus on it and find confusion. The disciples did. They forsook him and fled. In Gethsemane, he focused through it, but on the cross, Christ focused beyond it. We know that because the writer of Hebrews says, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. So put your focus in these days beyond it, resting in the fact that this too shall pass. I was sick some time ago and went in the medicine cabinet in the middle of the night and got that little bottle of Pepto-Bismol. On the side of it, it said something, big red letters, shake well before using, because all those ingredients are going to help me descend into the bottom of the bottle. I had to shake it up really well. And in a sense, that's maybe what's happening to some of us today, because God is going to use us through this in an amazing way as we come out on the other end and put our focus beyond this issue to how we're going to better serve and minister in days to come. On almost every page of the Bible is that little phrase, and it came to pass, this too shall pass. Blessings on you.
Thank you, Dr. Hawkins, for that encouragement. I like what you said. Keep our focus on what's important. Focus beyond what we're experiencing and what the problems are today. I think that really resonates in this season. All right, we're about at the point of the webcast where we need to get to some Q&A. So I'd like to invite the speakers today to join the screen with me. We'll all get on here, and let's jump into some questions. Todd asks, does housing allowance count towards payroll costs specific to the Paycheck Protection Program? That's a good question. Jen, do you want to take this one?
Hi, Todd. That is a very common question that we've been getting here at Guidestone. So I'd like to tell you the guidance that we've been telling our pastors and participants who are experiencing this exact same concern. First of all, as you know, housing allowance is exempt from federal taxation for most purposes, but it is included as a part of SECA taxes, and it's included as in the definition of compensation for retirement contributions. So with that said, what we would say is that housing allowance likely is considered a part of those average monthly payroll expenses for the employer. But as far as using your PPP loan proceeds in order to pay housing allowance, many SBA approved lenders may be reluctant to tell you to go ahead and do that. So what I would encourage you to do is to speak with your SBA lender, make sure they understand how your organization wants to spend that money and get their approval before you use those loan proceeds for housing allowance purposes.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate that. I think this next question is also going to be best suited for you. This one comes from Michael, and he asks, I'm bivocational, but was wondering if our church qualifies for any of the assistance under the CARES Act.
Hi, Michael. I'm sure it does. You may want to talk to an advisor to find out specifically, but what I would say is that likely your church does qualify for these SBA loan programs if you have fewer than 500 employees at your church. With that said, I know that these SBA loan programs exhausted their funds last week, but it's possible that Congress could renegotiate some new funding for these programs, and you may be eligible to apply in the future on behalf of your church. With that said, if you do not apply for either of these SBA loan programs, you will have access to payroll tax credits, either in the form of that paid leave credit we talked about earlier, or the employee retention credit. So know that you already have access to that. And as long as you file your quarterly reporting statement. And with that said, even now you have access to the employer tax deferral. And that is immediately available to you so that your church does not have to pay those taxes until 2021 and 2022. So hopefully that gives you some relief in the meantime.
Jen, another question that we're getting is about unemployment benefits. In Michael's situation as a bivocational minister, if his hours are decreased, does he have additional access to unemployment?
Yes, I believe that he probably would. Now, Michael, you're going to want to contact your state agency that handles those unemployment benefits. But with that said, what the CARES Act has done is actually open the floodgates for unemployment insurance. And that means that you no longer have to be completely unemployed to be able to apply for that. You can also, even if a mere reduction of hours, even as a bivocational minister, you can apply for those unemployment benefits.
All right, thank you, Jen. I appreciate the insight there and for that clarification. Next question here comes from Jeff. He asks, what best practices should our church implement as we prepare for reentry to make sure we're doing it safely? Let's see. Jim, do you want to take a shot at that one?
Sure, Seth. Hey, Jeff, that's a good question. We want to make sure that during reentry that we don't continue the spread of the virus. So you'll need to consider your state and local laws and guidelines as you transition forward. But as we do that, here's some things to keep in mind. First of all, review, update, and communicate to your congregation your infectious disease plan. You want to intensify your cleaning and disinfection efforts, communicate those to your congregation as well, and continue to teach and reinforce healthy hygiene practices. Perhaps you can look back at the last service that you were able to have in your church when you didn't shake hands or you asked people to give each other space. What were the things that were working then that you might want to implement going forward? For example, you might want to modify the method for collecting tithes and offerings, using the stationary collection box, or continuing to use the mail, or continuing to encourage online giving instead of passing a collection plate. Maybe modify how communion or Lord's Supper is done to avoid interactions or reduce interactions at least for the next few months. Consider making nurseries smaller with fewer children, or maybe not having childcare for the first few weeks until full restrictions are lifted. As far as your sick staff or any volunteers that might happen, encourage them or require them to stay home. Create easy systems for people to admit and to notify you when they are sick. Perhaps use your deacons to keep up with them until fully recovered and they return back to full service. If someone does get sick, obviously follow the procedures outlined in your infectious disease plan. You might want to look at your schedule of activities and to determine when to cancel or postpone those non-essential large gatherings and events until you are comfortable that you can move forward. These are just a few suggestions. Obviously, you know your ministry and your local situation, and you should adapt accordingly.
Thanks, Jim. Churches certainly have a lot to consider over the coming weeks and months on how to get back to some normalcy, but also prevent this further spread of the virus. Let's take a look at our next question here. This one comes from Colin. Colin asks, we're still discussing if we need to make any budget cuts. Is there a deadline for the one-time step down from Guidestone? And are there any limits to adjusting our plan mid-year? Let's see, Scott, why don't you take a stab at that one?
Yeah, sure. I can actually say, Colin, I know there's a lot of different variables to keep in mind as you're making these decisions. You've got to make sure that it makes sense from a budget standpoint, but then you also need to understand how it can impact your employees. So we completely understand that. And because of that, we actually designed the program such that you can make the decision all the way up until December 1st. And so that gives you a lot of time to make a decision and figure out what makes the most sense for your ministry. In addition to that, I do want to just point out that the flexibility that you now have with this one-time step-down approach allows you to move into a higher deductible plan or a lower cost monthly plan, premium plan, that could actually save you money on your budget. So that could be anything from, as I mentioned, the high deductible plans to our protection plans, which include Secure Health. So if you want additional information about that, and you're a group plan participant, go to our employer access portal for rates and plan designs. Or if you would like, you can also reach out to your relationship manager. If you're involved in our personal plans as an individual, you can reach out to our customer service team for more information. And as far as flexibility regarding the plan, this is a one-time option, so please keep in mind that as you make that decision, it's something that you can choose at some point over the next few months that hopefully will benefit your ministry significantly.
Hey, Scott, once that church makes a decision to step down for the remainder of the year, do they have the ability to change their mind or to even go back to another plan?
Thank you, Sean. That's a great clarification that we need to make sure everybody's aware of. Once you make that step down into a different plan, that actually needs to be your plan for the remainder of the year. But in the normal process of renewing, you'll have the ability to select a different plan effective 1/1 of 2021. So it gives you flexibility this year, but you can make a different decision for next year.
Thanks for that clarification, Scott. Next question here is from Dale. And Dale asks, how do I protect my retirement and or take advantage of the market right now? Now, Sean, you talked to us a little bit about that. Why don't you take this one?
Absolutely, Seth. And that seems to be a topic at most of our participants' top of their mind. Look, Dale, while everyone's retirement strategy is unique to their own risk tolerance and retirement timeframe, we believe that by sticking to your overall goals through the ups and downs of a market volatility, as well as increasing your monthly contributions if you're able to, it positions you overall for long-term success. So now is a good time to remember the 4 key tips to saving for retirement. which is one, just start early if you can, and then save sufficiently and consistently. Number three is what we're talking about right now. Stay invested and then stay diversified in your investments. So additionally, if you have an investment account or would like to open an account, you can choose to contribute using a dollar cost averaging approach by making periodic contributions. Guidestone has resources to help you create a diversified portfolio that meets your long-term objectives. And of course, you can always contact our customer solutions team, and they can provide a more personalized response.
Thanks, Sean. I know stay invested is a hard concept for many of us, but crucially important at this time of this season and this part of the cycle we're in. Next question we have here is from David. And David asks, with last week's update regarding the PPP program or the Paycheck Protection Program, what does Guidestone think is going to happen next? Jen, this sounds right up your alley. Why don't you take this one?
Sure. I wish I could tell you that I knew the future. We very much wish we could. With that said, what we do know is that if Congress grants additional funding for these SBA programs, our churches and our ministries are going to be able to have access to those funds. Thankfully, we are a part of an advocacy organization called the Church Alliance. And through our work in the Church Alliance over the last month, we've been able to ensure that nonprofits, including religious organizations like our churches and our ministries who are ministering and loving folks on the front line of this crisis, that all of those organizations have access to loan funds that typically have been reserved for for-profit businesses generating revenue. So if we happen to actually have access to more funds, our churches are going to be able to apply for them.
So that sounds like it's a bit of a wait and see type answer. Of course, follow up with us. We'll be closely monitoring what Congress does related to further funding of that program, and we'll get that information out as soon as we have it. So stay tuned on that. Next question here is from James. James says, as a pastor, I'm worried that people on our church staff will take out money and will not have any savings left for retirement. So people accessing their account now and not saving it for the future date it's intended for. How do I help them balance these decisions? Sean, that sounds like another one that you'd be best suited for.
Sure, Seth. Well, first of all, Pastor James, let me first appreciate you for your concern for your staff's retirement future. We too know and have the sensitivity to their immediate financial needs, but we also know that they've worked hard to prepare for their retirement account. So here's what we welcome, Pastor. For anybody who is considering taking out assets from their retirement account, we would love to speak with them one-on-one and maybe have them consider some alternative options. We believe that by doing this and viewing their overall goals, it could potentially give them a broader view and have them look at other opportunities like maybe the stimulus checks or the enhanced unemployment or even a loan if that's available to them. I would also encourage you to point to anyone asking this question to our customer service team. When they call, they'll certainly be met with the compassion and excellence that they deserve from our customer relations, as well as a personalized education to help them. We'll be more than happy to discuss things like our qualifications around the coronavirus related distribution, if their plan permits, as well as the CARE Act's relief checks or loan payment delays. We'll look at available withdrawal amounts and a lot more. So once again, Pastor, we appreciate your concern. We hear you loud and clear. We're here to serve your staff.
Thanks, Sean. Let's get to this next question here, to get as many as we can here in this time we have. Next question is from Linda. She asks, does my Guidestone plan cover testing and treatment for COVID-19? Scott, what do you say to that one?
Yeah, Linda, for sure. Guidestone, when all this was unfolding, was monitoring the situation and trying to make sure that we did whatever we could to make sure our participants, our members were taken care of. And so that did include extending coverage at no member cost for FDA-approved testing, as well as in-network, inpatient treatment. So that is available to you in your plan today. I also think it's important to note that our PPO plans, our secure health plan and protection plans have always had access to Teladoc at no member cost. That was actually also extended to our high deductible plans. And so that is something for you to be aware of. It's something that you can access at no additional cost. So once again, it's our intent, it's our desire to help you in the midst of this crisis, and especially those who are directly affected by the virus itself.
Thank you, Scott. I know Linda hits on a very popular question we've gotten over the last few months in the treatment and the coverage that we're providing through the plan with COVID-19. So I'm happy that the plan and proud of what the plan's been able to do to accommodate many of those uncertainties and needs of the population that are infected by the virus. Next question here is from Chad. And Jim, I think this one's going to be best positioned for you. He asks, any estimates on how this might affect overall giving in the next 3 months, 6 months, or over the next year or more? How much decline should we be preparing for? Jim?
Well, Chad, that's a great question. The short answer is we really don't know yet the longer term extent of the pandemic on our giving. I believe your overall giving recovery will be greatly affected, based on the speed of which our nation reopens. But we do know that the overall giving for many of our churches have already been greatly reduced. So, in late March, we did a study of SBC churches and determined that over 2/3 of the responding churches realized that they had reduced giving during those 2 weeks, and with almost half of them reporting much lower receipts. And over 2/3 also responded that they were concerned about their church's ability to sustain financial operations going forward. So we understand and understand that many of you are in a difficult situation or a challenging situation when it comes to your ministry finances. But even at the same time, we've heard anecdotally from some churches that their giving has stayed essentially the same. So I would leave you with this on this question. Depending on your location, the makeup of your church, the local impact of the pandemic on your congregation and their employment status, whether you have church members that are laid off on furlough, or have business closings in your area, the answer to this question really can vary widely. So my recommendation really is this: the heartbeat of your congregation, its constituencies, your community. And in light of that, I would suggest that you and your leadership team prayerfully evaluate the spectrum of possibilities and then plan accordingly.
Thanks, Jim. Let me also add, I know there's a lot of questions and concerns out there. How long is this going to last? What is going to be the impact? We want you to know you're not alone in this. Guidestone really wants to be here to support you and help you. So please feel free to reach out to either a relationship manager or our customer service team, and we'll be happy to talk through specifically the retirement or insurance or property and casualty related benefits that you have through us. And we'll be able to help come up with strategies to help you and your ministry deal with this challenging time.
Appreciate that, Jim and Scott. Thank you for the insight. The next question here comes from Brett. And Brett asks, what does the SBA define as utilities? Jen, that sounds like something you might know a little bit about.
Sure. There is some informal guidance on what are considered utilities, and you will definitely want to check with your SBA lender if you're using these loan proceeds for those purposes to make sure that whatever you're spending them on is approved by that lender. With that said, generally utilities are phone bill, electricity, those types of things. So internet access, water, gas, all of those normal utilities.
So Jen, let's follow up with that with a little bit more. We know it can help cover utilities. What other types of expenses can these funds help with?
Well, if we're specifically talking about the Paycheck Protection Program loan funds, what those can be used for are primarily payroll costs. So make sure you use those for not only the wages that you pay your employees, but also your retirement contributions and the monies that you spend to cover medical coverage. So all of that can be used with these loan proceeds. In addition to that, of course, you have these utilities. You can use it to pay down mortgage interest or rent if you happen to have that. So there really is a lot of flexibility on how to use these loan proceeds.
Next question we have here is from Charles. And he asks, what are my responsibilities as an employer if someone on my staff is diagnosed with COVID? It's certainly a heavy question, and I'm sure a situation that many have already experienced, and something that many will experience going forward. So, Scott, why don't you answer that one for Charles?
Well, yeah, actually, that's an important thing to keep in mind. Specifically, in fact, the CDC has some guidelines in that moment. So if you have an employee that becomes sick during the day, obviously they should be sent home immediately. You then also need to make sure that you are wiping down the surfaces, making sure that they're clean and disinfected. And then, frankly, you need to start getting some information together. So persons that they may have been in contact with, other individuals that may have been in close proximity to that employee, not just that day, but also the prior 2 days to when the symptoms actually were first viewed. And so that's something to keep in mind. Also, just make sure that everyone continues to stay 6 feet apart, and make sure that that is the way that you're approaching that going forward. So I think there's also some privacy concerns and some issues that need to be kept in mind as well. So I think, Jen, why don't you speak to some of those, please?
Yes, you're exactly right, Scott. So even though we are in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic and employers have never walked through these issues before, keep in mind that this CDC guidance is key, but you also still are subject to the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the EEOC guidance. So just because someone is sick, you still cannot tell everybody about that condition. Instead, you must hold the confidentiality of your employee. And what that means is that if your employee is determined to have COVID-19 or similar symptoms, but you know that they have worked closely, as Scott just mentioned, with other coworkers within 48 hours of those symptoms appearing, you must, as an employer, tell those coworkers that they have potentially been exposed in the workplace. However, you are not allowed to say which employee could have potentially exposed them. And that employee himself or herself is able to disclose their own medical condition to other people. But as the employer, you are not able to do that. And I know in our environment of prayers and really loving on our employees in that way, we want to be able to share that type of personal information. But keep in mind that if you do that, you would be compromising your employee's privacy in this situation. So with that said, do know that if you do have an employee who has been diagnosed with COVID-19 or who is presumed diagnosed with COVID-19, you are able to get a note before they're returning back to work. That may be impossible to do during this pandemic, trying to get that note from a provider. But again, just like with other sick leave type issues, you're able to get that verification that that employee is able to be back in the workplace.
The next question we have is from Mark. He asks, how can our church best mitigate the risk of future pandemics, firstly? And then he asks, what can we do to be better prepared if this ever happened again? Jim, what's your answer to that one?
Well, Mark, that's a great question. First of all, we want to acknowledge that the Lord knows our needs and is the source of our provision. From a leadership standpoint, as we look to mitigate future pandemics, we have several recommendations that we have for ministries now that we have seen this type of risk and the damage that it can cause. First of all, ministries should consider building up some reserves to allow them to run for several months and to cover operating expenses, perhaps 4 months, 6 months of reserves. You'll need to look at that and see if there's a way that you can do that over a period of time. Secondly, ministries should have protocols and training related to infectious disease. Add that to your policies and procedures so that you have next steps if another pandemic were to break out. Thirdly, ministries should continue to support and consider expanding their online communities and overall online infrastructure that has been utilized extensively over these past few weeks. Continue to be able to have online church and expand online giving. That will give you the greatest options and the greatest alternatives to be able to meet any future pandemics. And then lastly, probably ministries should look at what they're doing from an emergency perspective. What are your policies and procedures around that, including communications plans, operations plans, disaster plans for all types of unexpected occurrences, not just pandemics, but also if a tornado were to occur or floods, fires, etc.
Okay, Sean, I have two questions here. I think both will be a little quicker and that you would be best positioned for. The first one is from Lori, and she asks, is the rebate taxable or will I have to pay back any amount?
Yes, that's a good question, Lori. And no, you do not have to repay the stimulus check back, nor is it taxable if you're eligible to receive it.
Okay, pretty Cut and dry there. The second one is from Jonathan, and he asks, what is the payroll tax credit?
Jonathan, the payroll tax credit is part of the stimulus that provides a refundable tax credit for 50% of wages paid to employers to employees during the COVID-19 crisis. The credit is available to your employees who either have operations who were fully or partially suspended due to the COVID crisis, or their gross receipts declined by more than 50% when compared to the same quarter the prior year.
Our next question here is from Brian, and Jen, I think you're going to be the best, be on this best position for this one. He asks, we have a small staff with primarily part-time employees and volunteers, and we normally aren't subject to FMLA. Must we provide paid leave now?
Brian, that's a really good question. You know, in this country, we have never had paid leave requirements before. So this requirement under the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act is a really new thing, especially for a lot of small employers who typically are exempt from FMLA. So now, if you are an employer with 500 or fewer employees, which is the majority of our businesses and churches and ministries, you now are subject to provide this leave. And what that means is that for certain types of sick leave related to COVID-19 diagnoses, or for certain kinds of childcare needs, your employees are able to take this leave, but you as an employer must be able to pay certain amounts of wages depending on what kind of leave that is. With that said, if your church or ministry is small enough, meaning 50 or fewer employees, you may be able to qualify for an exemption from providing parts of that leave requirement. Now, the exemption applies to any leave taken with respect to childcare. So if you have employees who are requesting leave because their child's school or daycare provider or other childcare provider is no longer available due to COVID-19, meaning operations have ceased or the childcare provider is sick, that employee who is requesting that leave would ask you for leave, but you're able to deny that leave and take advantage of an exemption only if the absence of that employee would negatively affect your workplace, or if you don't have enough employees to be able to fulfill those responsibilities, or if the lack of that employee doing those services would put you at a financial disadvantage. So it's possible to be exempt from these requirements, but really that is not what Congress was intending by passing this. By passing this legislation, Congress really wanted employees to have the freedom to take care of their families and to be away from the workplace without fear of losing their job.
Hey, Jen, I know you always are good about reminding all of us as well that for every unique and specific situation, churches and ministries really do need to reach out to their counsel in their area who knows the applicable laws for their state. And so I think it's important for them to make sure that they have that advice ready as they go through these types of situations.
You're exactly right, Scott. Thank you.
All right, we have time for one more question here. This question's from Karen. Karen asks, can you give us an update on Mission Dignity and how the recipients are doing? I've been praying for them as I can only imagine this is a scary time. Well, being that I recently spoke with some of Mission Dignity's leadership, I think I might be best positioned to answer this one. And what they told me is that our recipients, Mission Dignity recipients, are doing very well. Obviously, they're a population that's very susceptible to the virus. What's interesting is Mission Dignity, along with the broader Guidestone population, began calling the nearly 1,700 households a few weeks ago just to check on them, see how they were doing. So we had some great opportunities as employees to have conversations with the faithful servants of the cross and how they're doing, and to encourage them and really be encouraged by them through some of these conversations. So Mission Dignity's financial assistance continues to flow full-fledged. I know the team is working very hard to do that, to consistently provide those checks and that support to those that very much need it. So they covet your prayers. So please be praying for that ministry and those that are beneficiaries of it. I'd also like to say that there has been a focus on ensuring that we're sensitive to those needs that crop up. There are certain programs in place that Mission Dignity can help for those additional unexpected needs. So there's been a big focus on that. If any of you want to learn more about how to take part in, whether it's financially or otherwise, with Mission Dignity, check out the website, missiondignity.org. There's information there how to get involved, whether it's donating or reaching out to perhaps a local Mission Dignity recipient to help support them. Thank you to those of you who continue to give even during these trying times. It's been a blessing. All right, so this is going to conclude our question and answer time. We've had a lot of time to go through these. Thank you for submitting those. For those that submitted questions, I'd like to thank our panel for spending some time with us to answer these questions as they stand. For those questions we didn't get to, please send those to info@guidestone.org, and we will have a follow-up to you just as soon as possible. As we conclude this webcast, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for the service. Just know that Guidestone is praying for you and thinking of you during this trying time. We will be sending out a copy of this webcast in the next 48 hours by email, and we'll have a copy online as well at guidestone.org/calendar. Again, thank you for your time. We look forward to continued conversations with you, and God bless you.